You are listening to Sophie and Sebastian. In this episode, Sophie has a soccer game, but she would rather play with her doll. Sophie's soccer game. Every Saturday in summer, Sophie had soccer. She did not see the point. "Soccer is stupid," she said. "Why is that?" asked Dad. It was Saturday morning, and he wondered how Sophie's soccer game would go. The older kids loved soccer, but not Sophie. "Soccer is stupid," said Sophie. "All you do is kick a ball." "But it's fun kicking a ball." "I would rather kick you," said Sophie. She did not really mean it, but it was fun to say. "Can I play soccer?" said Sebastian. "When you're older," said Mum. "Then you'll have to play," said Sophie. "These meanie pants will make you play." Sophie was the last to get ready. Dad had to put on her cleats and tie the laces. Sophie insisted on wearing her favorite skirt, and she took along a purse and her doll. If she had to play soccer, then she would do it as a princess. In the van on the way, Dad tried once more to convince Sophie that soccer was good for her. Dad said, "Did you know, Sophie, that soccer makes you a better princess?" "Not true," said Sophie. "It is true. If one day you want to dance at a ball, you can practice by dancing with a ball." There was laughter from the back seat. Sophie's sister Tessa said, "Dad is right. Haven't you read about Cinderella? When her stepsisters were not watching, she practiced her soccer moves." "I don't believe you," shouted Sophie. "It's true," said Dad. "And these days it's even more important to play soccer. Today's princes spend almost all their time and money on soccer. You may be the most charming princess in the world, but if you don't know certain things, like how much it costs to buy a soccer player, then you'll never marry a prince." "I don't even know what you're talking about," said Sophie. "And anyway, you can't buy a person." "We bought you," said Dad. "And at the time we thought we were getting a good deal." "Not true." "I wonder," continued Dad, "if we can get our money back. What if they find out that you don't like soccer?" With such talk they reached the soccer fields. Tessa and Lucas, the oldest two, ran off to their own teams. Mum and Sebastian went to the playground, and Dad took Sophie to her game. "Isn't it a beautiful day, Sophie?" said Dad. "Just look at the beads of dew on the grass, glittering in the sun. You can almost smell the freshly cut grass." But Sophie said, "It's not a poem, Dad. It's just grass. Grass is green. It doesn't glitter." "Sure it does," said Dad. "It's as if someone used your glitter glue." "Nobody has that much glitter glue," said Sophie. "Only God does, and He saves it for the stars." "Perhaps you're right," said Dad. They had arrived at Sophie's soccer field. Sophie's teammates were warming up by passing balls back and forth. Sophie would only pass with Dad, and she would not put down her purse or her doll. This made running more difficult, and Sophie had to extend her arms to keep her balance. Meanwhile, Dad had to run all over the place to get Sophie's ball back. Even though the sun was glittering on the grass and tiny beads of dew reflected the world in green, blue, and white before being scattered by a passing ball, despite all this, a number of Sophie's teammates had stayed away. This meant that there was no way Sophie could escape to the playground. Every child would have to play. Sophie's coach, Mrs. Dash, called in all the children and gave them an inspiring speech. "Now listen up, children. I know we don't always score a lot of goals. In fact, we haven't scored one yet. But we're here just to have fun. So let's have fun. And make sure you pass the ball. Are you listening, Sophie? Okay, do we all remember our cheer?" Some of the children shouted, "Go green!" But an even bigger cheer went up afterwards, one that the kids had invented themselves. "Go big green booger machine!" This was Sophie's favorite part. Sophie had even made up a special refrain. "We've got snot and you do not," she shouted. "Isn't that funny?" she said to Dad. Then Mrs. Dash told Sophie to put down her doll and her purse and go on the field. Sophie was a little bit scared of Mrs. Dash, so she gave her doll and purse to Dad and slowly trudged to her position. Soon the other team, the Orange Crush, were also ready, and the referee blew the whistle. The game had begun. What did the game look like? Well, if you were an alien, gooey and green, and your invisible spaceship was hovering right over the field, you might have wondered what strange things were happening below. Even though the kids started spread out over the whole field, they soon formed into a swarm, following the ball around the field back and forth like a little cloud of bugs in the summer air. Meanwhile, on the sidelines, big people were shouting things like, "Pass!" or "Scarlet is open!" Sometimes the ball would escape the swarm, mostly when it went out of bounds, and sometimes it would get close to one of the small nets on either side of the field. If you were an alien watching all this, you might have shaken your gooey green head, packed up your bags, and headed back to outer space. But in this game, something was out of place. Sophie soon got tired of chasing the ball. She walked over to Dad. "This is so boring," she said. "Plus, somebody could get hurt." "The game is not done," said Dad. "I am," said Sophie. Then Sophie and Dad had some more words for each other, and the only way Dad could convince Sophie to go back to playing for the last few minutes was if she could carry her purse and her doll. "Okay," said Dad, "but don't hit anybody with them." "Don't worry," said Sophie, and she ran back onto the field. But instead of going back to her own side of the field, where the Orange Crush were getting closer and closer to scoring a goal, she found a nice quiet spot by the opposite net and sat down to play with her doll. This was what she had planned all along. Out of her purse came a little blanket for her doll, candies for herself, a pen and writing book, and her favorite chapstick. If she had looked to the sidelines, she might have seen Dad and Mrs. Dash in earnest conversation. Sophie soon became entranced in her play. She placed her doll on the blanket so it would not get wet from the last drops of dew or be tickled by the grass. Then she gave herself a candy and looked through her notebook. Close by, the other team's keeper, with nothing to do, was hanging like a monkey from the top bar of the goal, both feet off the ground, swinging in the air. Sophie was just about to put on her chapstick when something terrible happened. Somebody had kicked the soccer ball her way, and it knocked her doll right over. Sophie was very angry. Here she was nicely minding her own business, and now her doll was hurt. She gave a shrill shriek, stood up, and kicked the ball away as hard as she could. What happened next was very surprising. The ball went very fast. It shot through the air and flew like a rocket before landing again on the grass and rolling right under the goalie's feet and into the other team's net. Sophie had scored a goal. The big green booger machine had won the game. The Orange Crush were crushed. Everyone started cheering, and Sophie got swarmed by her teammates. Even Mrs. Dash shouted, "Way to go, Sophie!" After the referee had blown the final whistle, Dad asked Sophie how she felt about being a hero. Wasn't it nice to score a goal? But Sophie said it wasn't worth it. She didn't like all the kids hugging her, and it wasn't nice of them to hurt her doll. Finally, they went to the playground, and Mum asked if her princess had a good game. Sophie was secretly rather proud of the goal she had scored, and she told Mum the whole story. "That's great," said Mum. "But I think your doll should get some of the credit, don't you think?" "Yes," agreed Dad. "Your doll was pretty much the only one who completed a pass." "You're all so silly," said Sophie, and she went off to play with her friends on the playground.